What have you got to lose? I realized that there was two ways that could be interpreted. Both have some uh, validity, right? I mean, the first one could be, hey, what have I got to lose, right? You know, what's a weekend? I'll give it a try. But it also implies a certain uh, that I haven't quite found what I've been looking for elsewhere, right? Up till now, I've tried a lot of things, and I'll be willing to look at it from a little different perspective. What have I got to lose, right? So in some sense, it has to do with sort of an honest evaluation of looking back on our life. Like, there's, undoubtedly for all of us, there's been a lot of, pleasant, good things, enjoyable, fulfilling things that have happened, and undoubtedly some challenging, difficult, disappointing, frustrating things, right? It's sort of a mixed bag for all of us. I mean, not, some of us have undoubtedly more difficult challenges than others. Some people have more opportunities than others. I mean, that seems to be how it is. But whatever our past or our circumstances, there can be a valid recognition that what I've been looking for up till this point, however I've been searching, somehow isn't ultimately fulfilling. Something, there's something, I may have gone really deep, and yet it feels like there's still something more to be seen, right? So there can be that sense of what have I got to lose? I'm willing to look at, take some chances, willing to look at things a little differently, seeing if there's a different perspective that can take me even into a deeper understanding of what this life is about. So there's that perspective which is useful. It's that willingness to continue to go further beyond whatever obstacles or identifications that we come up against, is in a direction of greater and greater freedom, greater liberation. Right? So just that willingness to take that kind of chance, just that, being willing to be open to that curiosity, to allow that to actually move us further. There's a really beautiful image. This is Nisargadatta Maharaj, who's an Indian sage, brilliant, from the last century. And he was talking about this very thing, and he talked about, sort of being willing to go further into the unknown with our way illuminated by the burning of our obstacles through the intensity of our awareness. So it's, so the path actually isn't, to skirt around obstacles. It's actually to realize that obstacles, whatever they are, however we perceive them, are ways to, that we can deepen our realization about what is actually living this life. So just that movement, just viewing life a little differently, like, rather than sort of bemoaning obstacles that we may be confronted with, or wanting to blame some situation or some other person for it. We can also take it as a way life is pushing us towards a deeper understanding of ourselves and what this life is about. Sort of a different way of looking at it. So it's still a challenge, right? It's still something, but it's not like we're reacting to that challenge. We're using our energies and our intelligence to actually move through it, try to understand it, try to understand our role in it. The sort of the underlying causes of it, perhaps. But to bring our whole self to it, rather than sort of squandering half or more of our energy sort of arguing why it shouldn't be like that, or why is this happening to me, or poor me, I'm always the victim, or whatever our storyline is, which is all just just squandering our energy that we realize at some point in our life isn't unlimited. Right? So we can see that each day, if we allow ourselves to be just, really upset and, fall into, victimhood or blaming or envy or jealousy or any of those kinds of states, we can just feel that energy sort of being sapped for the day. There may not be, may take our whole daily allotment of energy, and that energy can also be used to really go into what is happening, really look closely at our own role in it, what we're telling ourselves about it. Right? Because there's the event, there's the circumstance, that often, generally, maybe even most or all of the time is unavoidable, but what is avoidable is the story that we tell ourselves about it. Right? So, there's the event, and then there's the story. It's almost like the sports announcer that tells you about what just happened. You were watching the game just like they were, but then they'll tell you about it after the fact. So it's like our mind does the same thing. Well, something will happen, and then our mind figures that it has the role and the right and the privilege to explain it to us, tell us what really happened. It wasn't like we weren't there for it, but somehow our mind feels entitled to explain it to us. And it has done that for so long that we trust the explanation more than the event. We trust what our mind tells us more than what actually happened. It sort of fills in all the reasons and the whys and who should have done this or shouldn't have, and adds that whole extra dimension unnecessarily. And what all of that explanation and rationalization and justification does is obscure what actually happened, and maybe our role in it, and maybe learning something about it. If we're telling ourselves what should have happened or why it shouldn't have happened, we're not actually learning anything. We're just trying to justify our own actions in the situation. But if we allow ourselves to just to be with whatever it is that does happen, and see it clearly, just as objectively as we can, And it's hard to do that because the instrument that we're looking from, what we take it to be, is the same instrument that's involved in the interaction, right? So it's it's sort of like a scientist trying to do the experiment on themselves. It's not like they're uninvolved, right? So that's the challenge. And to the extent that we can just see it objectively without taking everything personally. When we see it as really an opportunity to learn rather than an event that needs to be defended, protected, justified, responded to with anger or whatever. Right? When we can just see it as it is. So that's sort of this first interpretation. What have I got to lose? Is the willingness to look at things sort of afresh. Really, really look at things as objectively as we can. I mean, we're still using this body-mind instrument, so we're still, trying to examine ourselves using the apparatus that we have at hand, which has been, thoroughly conditioned through our lifetime by experiences and beliefs and, things that we've accumulated along the way. But that's how it is. That's what we've got to work with. The other way of looking at the title, "What Have I Got to Lose?" is almost like a traveler on a long journey. Maybe you've never gone on a particular journey before, but you're going out way, way out into the hinterlands. Almost like maybe when the American West was first being settled and the first pioneers were headed out. I mean, you've seen these Western movies where they're leaving the last bounds of civilization, and they just load up the wagon trains with every conceivable thing that they might ever need, and they head out. And along the way, they're just chucking things out, or they realize they don't actually need that whatever music box, or this family heirloom, or fancy china, or what, so along the way everything gets chucked down, and the sort of the further you go, then you realize that what's actually needed is much less than you thought was needed. So that's the sense of what have I got to lose, right? What burdens am I carrying that I feel like are essential to this lifetime, essentially to my sense of being and who I am, that I don't really need, right? What extra baggage am I carrying that I don't need to? So there's lots of possibilities, right? So every concept that we hold about ourselves, right? We could. There's lots to choose from. Let's just pick one. Let's just pick. I'm not worthy. How about that one? It's not that it's, our one and only belief about life, but it's something that I think for most of us raises its head every once in a while. That be fair? So we can, we can't stop any random thought from running through our head, right? But what gives it power is that we believe that it's true. Like, oh my God, maybe that's true. Maybe I'm not worthy, like, of anything. And then when we believe a thought, I mean, that's just one thought among thousands, right? But if we just believe that one thought, then how does that thought change the filter through which we're viewing life? How does believing that thought make life look different? Right? Or the other way you could ask it is, if I didn't believe that thought, what would life actually look like? But what most of us do is get engaged in that game, like, oh my God, maybe I'm really not worthy. What do I need to do to be worthy? Right? That's the antidote, right? You got bit by the snake, and then here's the antidote for it. What do I got to do to be worthy? Right? How would you answer that? What would be sufficient? I don't know. If you were the one to solve world hunger, would that be sufficient? See, it's just the other side of the same game, right? It's the belief in, oh no, I'm not worthy. And then it's like, oh, the solution, I know the solution. I need to do something in order to be worthy. But that second movement is based on the belief in the first one, right? If you didn't believe the first one, the second question would never arise. If there was never a question of, whether I feel worthy or not, you would never have the second question, what do I have to do to be worthy, right? It just wouldn't come up. I know I've told this before, but it's a really, really valuable insight, because this whole question of worthiness is cultural, somehow built into our culture. And I think in the early 1990s, there was an American psychologist that went over and had a personal meeting with the Dalai Lama. And he asked about that. He said, well, what about unworthiness? And the Dalai Lama can speak English. I mean, he speaks with an accent, but he has a perfectly good vocabulary. And he didn't understand what this psychologist was talking about. And he sort of turned to his interpreter, and they went back and forth, and finally got some gist of it. And Dalai Lama said, doesn't exist in our culture. There's, I read about a similar cultural thing. There was a woman from Nigeria, grew up in poverty in rural Nigeria and ended up going to grad school in New York City and studying psychology. And the topic came up about loneliness. And it's similar. She had to have somebody explain to her what that was. And finally she sort of got a sense of it and said, doesn't exist in our country. There can be devastating poverty, violence, abuse, all kinds of other things, but loneliness wasn't happening, right? There was some deeper sense of community that just, didn't have room for loneliness. So in that same way, we can just see how some of these things that just feel like they're part of who we are, like just some sense just feels like hardwired, built in, and yet we can see that somehow it's something that we've assumed along the way is true. It's not actually essentially who we are. It's just a set of belief that we've picked up along the way. And again, it's not the thought. You can tell pretty quickly as soon as you sit down to meditate that we don't control our thoughts. Thoughts will arise and do their thing, and sometimes if we're focused on a particular thing, like our hobby or our work or something, we can stay focused for a long time, and that's fine. That's useful. But what I'm talking about is when we're actually don't need to be thinking about anything you could say, with our working mind, right? And what we revert to is our thinking mind, which tends to run on even when there's nothing for it to do particularly. And we can notice that those thoughts, the mind, the brain continues to produce thoughts that aren't particularly helpful, useful, just random thoughts. Themes arise and fall. Sometimes themes can, recur year after year, same thought patterns, right? But the only thing that gives any of those thoughts power is our belief that they're true, or they might be true, or we're afraid that they might be true. Some relationship with them. They're just thoughts. It's sort of like elevator music, you're not expecting to hear inspirational symphony, it's just elevator music. So that's the second meaning, what have we got to lose? What are we hanging on to that we don't really need to hang on to? What beliefs about ourselves are we believing are true that we've sort of assimilated into what we believe we are, that we don't need? Any self-limiting thought sort of hold us into this paradigm of I am this body mind, and that's what I am, and I've got these beliefs and these concepts that I have about myself and the world, and that's what I am. So they talk in religious scriptures about worshiping sacred idols, right? So if we're worshiping this concept as being true, is that not what we're doing? It's true, I believe it. I will live my life in accordance with that. So we can see that any concept that we have about life, about ourselves, it's not true on the face of it. Can't be. Any concept will be less than the actuality of it. Any concept that we have about ourselves will be less, far, far less than the reality of what we are. So any concept that we have about ourselves, who we are, that we're limited to whatever our storyline up till this point is. Everything that we hold as true as a belief or a concept will be an obstacle to going beyond beyond all self-limiting ideas. And so this is in the theme of what am I carrying that I can afford to jettison, throw overboard, right? What beliefs do I have that feel self-limiting, that I don't need to? So then the question is, okay, I can identify something, maybe, what's a good story? I've been wronged. How about that one? Okay. So that, I mean, you just say that and it can feel contractive, right? Right? So we can just investigate that. So the idea isn't to really try to make yourself not think that, right? Like, okay, I'm just going to think the opposite, right? Well, that's not really that helpful. It's not that convincing any more than it's, convincing to go from unworthy to worthy. It's both two sides of the same coin, right? So the sense of I've been wronged, but we can look into that as like, if first of all, is it the other person's responsibility to do what I want them to do or expect them to do? The reality is they did or they didn't do what they did or didn't do. That's the reality. The expectation that they should have done something different, that's my job, right? That's our own job. So one we can control and the other one we can't. The one we can't control is what the other person does or doesn't do, said or didn't say. Right? That we don't have any control over. And any expectations that we have, may get fulfilled sometimes and not other times. And if that expectation is strong enough, then we get frustrated or hurt if it's not fulfilled. And we blame the other person for it. Right? The other person just being who they are. Right? Well, the risk is creating the expectation that they will behave in a certain way and really feel like we have the right to have that happen. And therefore, when it doesn't happen, which is not rare, it hurts, right? Because I was let down. They disappointed me. They hurt me. No, you did that yourself. Right? I mean, it sounds a little harsh, but at least you have control over that. If the expectation or the insistence that a certain person act the way we want them to act all the time, then we've set ourselves up. So we can see the reality of that and just not play that game anymore. Or we can just keep hoping that the other person will do what we want them to do all the time, and then just deal with our frustration and disappointment and hurt when that happens. We can do that too. But we have the choice, right? One way is within our own hands. We're not dependent on another person behaving a certain way. We give them their freedom, and we give ourselves the freedom too. We give ourselves the freedom of, being at peace. With whatever happens, because we're not insisting that anything in particular happens. When something pleasant happens, of course, it feels good. Something more challenging happens. It's not like we were expecting that it always go the way we want it to go. So we deal with that. But that's what I'm talking about in terms of the baggage, jettison the baggage. In this case, the baggage is the belief that the other person should always act in a certain way, and that I have the right to expect that. So we can just say, it's possible to do that, but it just sets me up for disappointment and hurt. And I don't want to do that anymore. And then you're free to be with the other person, and the other person is free to be themselves, and it's okay, right? But what we've given up is that sort of very personal positioning of wanting things to be a particular way, right? I mean, can you feel that? Like, I want this other person to be exactly like I want them to be, and they're not always that way, so I'm just going to try harder, right? You can feel it in your body, right? We can also look at it in terms of past events. Maybe this person's no longer in your life at all, but somehow, 10, 15, 20 years ago, that person did something hurtful. Okay, so that was the event. Not pleasant, not fun, but it's also not happening now, right? The only thing happening now is any resentment that we're continuing to hold. But we feel justified in that, right? I'm not going to let them off the hook. I mean, what they did was wrong, and I have a right to be resentful, right? I'm gonna hang on to that one because I'm entitled to, because they were wrong. The other person may be long gone. They may not even remember the event or care about the event or who knows what. But what is still alive for us is that reluctance to let it go. And who is that hurting? But what holds it in place is we feel like, no, that's right. I'm right. That shouldn't have happened. They were wrong. I didn't deserve that. It was unfair. Right? Can you feel it? But the person that's hurting is the one holding on to that. So it's like these beliefs have solidity to them, right? They have power to them, I mean, they affect our lives. I mean, they sap our energy. And so we can really look at whether that's how we want to use our energy. You know, how we want to live our life is, do I want to live my life holding on to this resentment? Or can I see that there was an event that happened? Maybe I had some role in it, maybe not the predominant role, but some role. But the main fact is that it's no longer happening. And yet that energy is still there affecting my life. So, so how to deal with that? So the question is, how do these kind of strongly held beliefs, how do we let them go? We can't do it just by personal will, like, you know, I'm just going to not think about it, right? Or I guess I should forgive them, right? He can feel that's not going to work. But what we can do is really see the role of conditioning. Like all of these body-mind organisms, every single one of us has been thoroughly conditioned, right? Right from, certainly before birth as well, from just DNA conditioning, but you know, very obviously after, you know, during this lifetime being conditioned by our parents, our teachers, our friends, all of our experiences, girlfriends, boyfriends, etc. All of those incidences have caused us to develop ideas about how we are, how the other person is, how the world should work, how the world does work. And then that conditioning colors how we view the world, so we tend to view it in that same way. Right? If we were told as a young child that the world is a dangerous place and just be careful, you know, you might get hurt, you know, don't play with sticks, you'll poke your eye out, whatever the storyline was, you know, we can begin to view life as dangerous, something, you know, you have to really be careful of. People might try to take advantage of you. And so that colors how we see the world, and then every time something does happen, then it reconfirms that belief. So it, you know, it's experiences help create the conditioning, and then the conditioning helps color the experiences, and around we go. So what we can do is just see how that operates. Just see that, I guess first acknowledge that, yes, this body-mind has been conditioned, you know, in a certain way to develop certain beliefs, certain habits, certain opinions about ourselves. And we can just acknowledge that. But the question is that the end of the story? I mean, is that the entirety of what we are? These concepts, beliefs, patterns, programming, you could say. Is that the whole story? But we can't really answer that question until we really understand the fact of that conditioning and the sort of the nature of it, and allowing us to just really examine it closely. And just without judgment, that's really the key. It's like all of us were conditioned, some in some ways, some in other ways, some functional, right? Some not so functional, some patterning we like, right? Some patterning not so much. That true? So we can just see, okay, that's how this, without me even knowing it was happening, that's how this body-mind got conditioned. Okay. It's not actually a problem. Might be inconvenient sometimes, right? We wish that we were, I don't know, more outgoing or more personable or more this or that, taller, shorter, whatever. But we can see that those are just attributes of this body-mind. They're not really essentially what we are. And the only way we can see that is if we allow ourselves to just notice and recognize whatever the conditioning is without judgment. That's the important part. It's just to say, yes, that happened. Yes, I tend to behave like this. When A happens, I tend to behave like B. We can just see that. It's okay. But we can also notice at the same time that there is something else present for all of us already. Just a sense of, like we were exploring this morning, just a sense of being present for whatever's happening. So that sense of being present for, we can notice that awareness itself isn't judgmental. It's just simple presence, right? The mind may be doing its judgmental thing, self-assessment, self-blame, whatever it's doing. But there's something that notices that isn't judgmental. It's just aware, right? Just aware of me being judgmental or aware of me being unworthy. So what's aware of something is prior to whatever it is that we're aware of, right? What's aware of my thought process is something more fundamental than thought. It's not another thought. It's something that's aware of whatever thought it arises. So from that perspective of awareness, of being present for whatever arises, then it really calls into the question, what concept, what belief is necessary for us to live this life fully? And we can see that any concept about life is not life actually. It's like the mind's attempt to it's like the Cliff Notes version of life, right? The mind summarizing what your actual experience is. But we don't actually need that. We have the it's our birthright to actually live this life fully without this voice in our head telling us what we can and what we are and aren't capable of. What our self-limitations are. We tend to think of that voice as the adult in the room, right? Like the one that's, trying to maintain order. But it's not, it's just a judgmental voice. It's just the next thought, right? About arguing about what we are or what we should have been or so we can just see that as a particular kind of programming, just that voice. I mean, it was sort of like the, parental voice when we were little kids telling us what we should do, what we shouldn't do, how we should behave. We don't need our parents anymore. We can do it to ourselves. But we can just see all of that as patterned thought. And then there's this awareness that is aware of the patterning. So the usefulness of really looking at the patterning closely is to see the nature of that accumulated conceptual thought. How it's trying to reduce and make sense out of life. How it's trying to have some control over how we experience life. But when we look at it closely, we can see that we don't actually need it to do that anymore. We'll still be able to function, as we need to out in the world. But, in the privacy of our own beingness, we don't have to give credence to this voice that is telling us how things should be, how I should be. Right? You can't make the voice stop. It'll subside over time, but it'll subside by ceasing to believe it, ceasing to be fascinated by it. It's just, we sort of believe it and fear it. All wrapped up in one. We give the power to that voice, nobody else. So we can just see that, not by dismissing it or ignoring it, but just looking at it and realize that it's not actually true. Maybe partially true, maybe relatively true, but really true? I mean, is that really true? Like even just the examples that we used, am I an unworthy person? Well, maybe sometimes, sure. All the time? That's the only thing that you ever are? No, right? But that's what we tell ourselves. It's sort of like the stickers on the bathroom mirror that's sort of the negative one of those, like, I'm unworthy. You say it often enough and then you give reality to it. Probably has more power than the positive ones, right? So we can just, even the phrase, I am, that's pretty true so far, right? And then whatever word we add after that is not true, right? What word would you add after that that's ultimately true? I mean, you can't even say, I am a human, right? Mostly human. Except for the 10 trillion bacteria in your belly, So any word that we add after I am is limiting any self-judgment, any criticism, any generalization, any characterization will always be not true. Might be partially true sometimes, but what's much more true is I am. Right? There's a sense of being here. There's a subject here. There's something that's looking out of. I, when we say I, that's sort of what we're referring to. We think it's this body-mind, but it's really something deeper than that. It's just this sense of presence here. Am, sort of being, a form of the word to be alive, to exist, right? I am. So it's pretty close to the truth. It's not, it's still a concept in a way, but it's getting down to the bare bones, right? I exist, I'm here, I know that. That's sort of the one thing that we can actually know with some certainty, that what I am is, I may not know what that is, but I can know that there's a sense of being here and of existing in this moment. That I can say for sure. So in this search for what we truly are, that's sort of narrows the playing field, in terms of where our investigation can take us. But to really look from that perspective, at that point, a lot of the baggage has been jettisoned, right? To get to that point of being willing to consider what we are as just this simple, extraordinary sense of presence, aliveness in each moment. Just that. But in that, there is aliveness, there is openness, there's receptivity for whatever arises within that. But being available to it without preconceived notions, without a philosophy about life and how other people should be, and you're just available for whatever the situation requires. You're not looking through a lens, a filter, a veil. You're just available to whatever life offers in that moment. There's still intelligence, right? Intelligence to respond as the situation requires. You're more available for that because you're not coming from a preconceived agenda. You're present, you're available. Much more enjoyable way to live. Much freer, right? Sometimes we act, sometimes we don't. It's just whatever the situation requires. Sometimes we say something, sometimes we don't. Sometimes we're moved to assist in a certain circumstance. Sometimes we see there's more wisdom in not. Right? There's no absolute rules. It is, it falls back on our innate intelligence to really, as deeply as we can in that moment, perceive what is needed and respond wholeheartedly.